Incoming message.
Welcome, junior analysts, to this highly classified explainer. I'm really glad you're here today because I'm pulling back the curtain on a series of cold case files that honestly have kept me up at night. You know, for years, as paranormal field investigators, we've always treated anomalous encounters as completely isolated events. A haunting over here, an apparition over there. But what happens when you start laying those seemingly unconnected files side by side? Well, you uncover a pattern. Today, we aren't just looking at some local ghost story. We are tracking a serial, supernatural pattern of movement. We are tracking the nomadic entity. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the tactical structure for today's briefing. We're going to cover the global anomaly, some bizarre linguistic anomalies in the testimony, the migration timeline, its tactics of intelligent evasion, the migration speed, and we'll wrap up with a final threat level assessment. Section 1. The global anomaly. Correlating independent encounters. To start, we need to completely toss out the idea of an isolated haunting. We're not talking about a single creepy house with a dark history. We are looking at 5 entirely independent sightings across the globe. 5 totally different people in 5 different countries encountering the exact same entity, and it's leaving completely terrified witnesses in its wake before vanishing. Now, as astute analysts, you might be asking right off the bat, how do we know it's not just a localized haunting? How do we know these aren't just 5 similar but unrelated events? Well, we cross-reference the physical characteristics and the environmental markers from all 5 case files, and the data overlap is literally impossible to ignore. We've proven a single global pattern. Let's look at the evidence. Here is the physical evidence collected across all 5 international incident sites. In every single case, witnesses describe a tall, humanoid figure with a completely featureless face. It never lingers, either. It visually manifests for exactly 30 to 45 seconds. Witnesses also report this intense, radiating cold coming right from its center. But the sensory artifacts are what really stand out in the field notes. At every location, there is a sudden, highly unnatural onset of total silence right before the entity appears. This is immediately followed by a low, rhythmic humming sound and a lingering scent of atmospheric ozone. And finally, its arrival always triggers severe camera static, flickering visuals, and massive electromagnetic disturbances right before it vanishes. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the hard thermal data, 18 degrees Celsius. Guys, this wasn't just a subtle chill in the air. During the very first documented encounter in rural Wales, our instruments recorded a rapid 18 degrees Celsius temperature drop in exactly 4 minutes. That is a localized freeze that completely defies natural thermodynamics, and it was centered entirely on the entity's position. Moving on to Section 2, Linguistic Anomalies in Testimony. The impossible coincidence. If the physical evidence wasn't enough to convince you, we need to transition to what I think is the most chilling piece of evidence in this entire dossier. We ran psychological profiles and conducted deep interviews with the independent witnesses, and it's the language they used that changes absolutely everything. This is the exact quote from a father in rural Wales taken in August 2023. He actually caught this entity on a night camera in his home. The video shows this unmistakable, completely wrong-looking humanoid standing motionless for 32 seconds before the camera aggressively cuts to static. When interviewed, he said, "It was there and then it wasn't. Like it unmade itself from the room." That is a very specific, very haunting turn of phrase. The family moved out immediately, leaving the house completely empty. Fast forward 10 months later, entirely different continent. A homeowner in Prague reported the exact same physical and thermal anomalies. But look at this side-by-side comparison. The Prague witness spoke only Czech, had absolutely 0 English proficiency, and 0 prior contact with the Welsh family. In fact, the Welsh encounter's video was practically buried at the time. Yet when the Czech testimony was translated, the phrasing was, like it unmade itself from the room. So the crucial point is this. We are dealing with a vocabulary-perfect alignment across continents. Our linguistics team verified this is not a translation artifact or some weird coincidence. It is a verbatim match in the conceptual description. This impossible linguistic anomaly proves definitively that we are not tracking different spirits. We are tracking the exact same target, and it is imprinting the exact same psychological terror on its witnesses. Section 3. Timeline of Entity Migration, Mapping the Global Flight Path. Once we realized it was the same entity, we had to map its global flight path. We're looking at a clear, tactical pattern of movement across 4 continents over an 18-month period.
Let's look at the chronological timeline. It starts in August 2023 in Wales. 10 months later, June 2024, it pops up in Prague. From there, it makes vast geographical leaps. Late 2024, it surfaces in Turkey. Sometime in 2025, it hits Canada. And our most recent, heavily documented sighting occurred in March 2026 in Australia. It is systematically moving between global hubs. Section 4. Tactics of Intelligent Evasion. Calculated Responses to Observation.
So why is it moving? Well, this is where the dossier gets truly terrifying. This movement isn't just random wandering. The data strongly suggests that the entity's migration is a highly calculated response to human observation. It deliberately avoids previous locations once it's been documented. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between what you've been taught and what we're actually facing. Standard haunting myths tell us spirits are bound to specific geographies, like a house or a graveyard. The nomadic entity migrates globally. Standard movement is supposedly random, but this entity avoids previous locations entirely to demonstrate conscious planning. While traditional ghosts repeat their actions for the cameras, this entity moves to an entirely new continent the moment it realizes it's been successfully documented. This is strategic, intelligent evasion. We've distilled its behavior into what we officially call the evasion protocol. Step 1. Arrival, which is signaled by that severe 18-degree localized temperature drop and that sudden, eerie onset of silence. Step 2. A brief 30 to 45-second visual manifestation, just long enough to trigger a camera sensor or a human witness. Step 3. Intentional evasion through aggressive camera static and electromagnetic disturbance, literally blinding our recording equipment. And Step 4. Immediate relocation to a completely new continent to avoid redocumentation. It absolutely knows when it's being watched. Section 5. Tracking the migration speed, a countdown between continents. Let's move to the timing and see how this builds. If it knows it's being watched, we need to look at how its behavior is changing. By analyzing the elapsed time between these global sightings, we can actually see a shifting speed and a growing urgency in its movements. Notice the elapsed time mapped out here. Between the first sighting in Wales and the second in Prague, it took 10 months. But look at the subsequent global hops: Turkey, Canada, Australia. The average time between sightings has shrunk drastically to just 3.5 months. As public documentation and awareness of this entity increases, its migration speed accelerates. It's essentially a countdown timer, and those intervals are getting dangerously short. Section 6. Final Threat Level Assessment, Predictive Target Modeling. I want to share a personal reflection with you all. As a seasoned investigator, the growing danger here isn't just that we're dealing with the supernatural. The real danger is that we are tracking a conscious, migrating threat that actively adapts to our investigative methods. Here is our current status. The entity was last documented in Australia in March 2026. If we apply our shrinking timeline overlay and assume its new pattern of 3.5-month intervals holds true, our predictive model points to a projected arrival in June 2026, most likely somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. Consider this a cautionary briefing. If you are a field investigator operating in the Northern Hemisphere this June, you need to be fully prepared for that sudden drop in temperature, that lingering scent of ozone, and the camera static. Because these case files have now been heavily analyzed, the pattern of the nomadic entity is becoming public knowledge among analysts like us. So I leave you with this final, critical question to chew on as you review these files. Assuming a June arrival, is this entity still moving along its predictable path? Or, realizing we finally caught on to its game, has it learned to hide better? Stay vigilant out there, everyone. Keep your eyes on the data.
Come to me, chickens! Cock-a-doodle-doo!